Welcome to Biblios, the space where we think about biblical thinking. Today we'll be asking the question, what is a pastor?
With us today to discuss that, we have Pastor Patrick Johnson, who has been a pastor probably for longer than we've been alive. So he's bringing a lot of experience. What does a pastor actually do?
I think if you were to try and define it from a biblical perspective, perhaps have a hard time, actually, because pastors aren't necessarily described that much in the Bible.
So they don't exist, or?
They do. We have some texts that are somewhat similar to what a pastor is and does, but you don't necessarily have a pastor completely described in the Bible, actually.
One text that comes to mind that I've heard used when Paul is speaking to Timothy, and he says, I give you this charge, preach the word, be prepared in season and out of season, correct, rebuke and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. You know, I suppose it sounds quite grand, a few other things in there, rebuking and so on, but you know, what does that look like, and how do those ideas sort of feed through into I don't know, the role of somebody who, you know, Paul is calling out into ministry?
I guess the reason why I said first of all that it's not necessarily described so well in the Bible is at least the church as we understand it from, let's say, the New Testament, the second half of the Bible, that time, they looked a little bit different to the churches we often have today. Okay. They were much more kind of house groups rather than people congregating in one big building. And you have somebody up there doing a lot of preaching, as it says there, etc. Yeah. That's why pastors today are much more, they have much more of a managerial role in what they're doing often, and a leadership role, definitely, that's described in the Bible too. But you got to think a lot smaller scale in the Bible. But as it says there, you know, you got to preach. And that is, I guess, one of the things that pastors are best known for, preaching, standing up and talking about something from the Bible that should influence people in their everyday lives. And then you've got lots of other things, and then how to live out a practical Christian life then. And that's what pastors are there for. We help in most of the major events of people's lives. So when they're born and everything that happens throughout their lives, getting married, getting baptized, major events, and also death. And we're there basically seeing people through their whole lives and helping them to navigate life, if you like.
I remember when I was little, you know, go to church at the weekend and, you know, you see the pastor there, he would deliver the sermon and do all of the other things that looked important. I don't know if I understood them all at that time, but, you know, one thing that would sort of pass through my mind is, okay, you know, we see him there at the weekend, but, you know, what does he do during the rest of the week?
Okay, yes.
Does he do something else, or is it just
yes.
just the one day that
one day a week job? Yes, indeed. I mean, especially in the way it's developed today, pastors seem to be, there's that big guy up at the front, or woman, of course, up at the front doing all this preaching and teaching, etc. But if you think, I mean, the word pastor, it really means a shepherd, if you like. That really means then that you're shepherding people, and that doesn't happen once a week. Life happens every day of the week, and life happens very unexpectedly. Different things will happen, and so you've got to basically be there when things are happening. Yes, you need to prepare for various things, which is what happens a lot during the week, because to stand up and be in front of people for, let's say, half an hour and to say something that's worthwhile, it takes quite a bit of preparation, especially these days when people can check on their phones if what you're saying is correct. You know, you'll see them in the congregation doing that. But you're there visiting people. You're just helping, seeing, if you like, walking with people through life. So feeding, then, if you want, from the preaching, helping to heal whatever hurts there may be going on with your people. That's all within what a pastor does.
I mean, when you talk about your people, who are you pastor for? Because Julian was saying that when he was younger, he'd be at church and then he'd see the pastor only once a week. Like, are pastors there just for adults, or are they there for children too? How does that work?
Yeah, meant to be there for everyone.
Okay.
Not all pastors feel comfortable with children and young people, but a pastor is meant to be a shepherd for everyone, both if you want to use that image still, the sheep and the lambs. So it is for everyone. So it's a good point you're making, because often we can tend to do that. We make it very intellectual and all the rest of it, and as if we're only talking to adults. And it's meant to be a safe place for all age groups, different mentalities as well. You're kind of you're something for all men in that sense.
And children.
And children, yes.
In terms of something you were saying earlier, that the pastoral role is kind of different to what you'd find in the Bible. Like, one thing that I was thinking, maybe some people who are joining us are thinking as well, if it's different to what's in the Bible, isn't that a bad thing? Or like, shouldn't it be exactly the same as what was happening in the Bible? So should we be having all these big churches, or shouldn't pastors be doing what they were doing back then?
Yeah, good question. I think, society changes. That would mean that the expectations would change as well. What you have described in the Bible is often what was going on in that local context. And so, that's what that job description would be like. Okay.
So then the shepherding is like always contextual.
Indeed. And it's not that super, mega churches are wrong. I think they have all kinds of challenges with them, but that's the way in which society seems to have developed these days. There are some inherent dangers, I think, because then you kind of put the pastor up on a pedestal and they become, idolized in some way, and that's not necessarily healthy. As you say, it is a contextual thing. So because this is the way society functions now, we're not so much in homes, even though that may not be a bad thing, at least in this part of the world. There are some places where it may be a little bit dangerous to be meeting as followers of Christ. And so you expect it to be perhaps a little bit more like what the Bible was telling in the New Testament, where Christians were very much a minority, very much persecuted for this faith. And so they met in smaller groupings. And you'd kind of expect, okay, if that's the case in a certain country, then maybe it would look a little bit more like how it was in the Bible.
As you talk about like the word pastor meaning like shepherd, but why do people need shepherding?
I think because we all grow in different ways at different times, and we are social. So in other words, we group together. You kind of need leading and guiding. I think that really is a thing. Will everyone go and find food on their own? Possibly, if you like. But when it comes to different ways of living, then I think we learn that best together rather than just being on our own. I know we're in a very individualistic age these days, but you're still seeing people gathering together and sharing ideas, etc. Do we need a shepherd? Do we need a leader in that? I think so, because we're all at different stages, and hopefully the shepherd knows the terrain, knows what's good and what should be avoided, etc., and helps guide their flock, their group of people through some of that.
Sorry, just raising a lot of questions from Julian. Have you got one?
I do, but it's going in a slightly different direction. So, I mean, if you have one.
Well, I was just thinking then, if the role of this shepherd is to guide, should the shepherd be of a certain age? How does a 25-year-old guide a 60-year-old?
Yes, indeed. And I think that can happen. There's no doubt about it. I think you need a certain amount of life experience. 25, you can have had quite a bit of life experience. You need quite a bit of intellectual understanding of things as well, because the Bible, people need to study it and understand what's there and how do you get the principles out of it for today. And that's what, someone coming out of college or university would have done. Not everybody has the opportunity to have looked into it like a student would have done. Yes, a younger person can lead an older person, with a certain amount of humility and understand that maybe, the older person has some life experience that they can learn too, and it can go both ways. So, I think a younger person can do that.
Okay.
I was quite interested in something that you said earlier, and I think in a number of comments you've picked up on it. You described the role of the pastor as also sort of being a managerial role. And And I'm thinking of, the role of a manager, particularly as maybe it's portrayed sometimes today. And it in some senses it can contrast quite starkly with that of a shepherd. A manager may be portrayed as somebody who is maybe they have a firm hand at times, if we put it that way. How does one maintain the balance between sort of managing and shepherding?
There's no doubt about it. There are some roles within what happens at church that are managerial. In other words, you've got budgets you've got to look at. You are helping the people in your church to work towards a certain goal. So you're setting goals, etc. That's leadership, of course. But then how do you manage all the different teams that are supposed to work together? When you get your leaders together, how are you doing your strategic planning and all those kind of things? So that's why I say there's managerial things in there, because you're managing different types of people into one direction.
I mean, I suppose there are some strong words that are used in in
Yes.
Timothy. So
Yes.
I do see
Indeed.
a role for that side.
And I guess our great example is Jesus himself. He calls himself the Good Shepherd, and he was without a doubt a great leader. And yet we see him doing a kind of leadership that was serving others too. So, we use the term servant leadership. And I think if you keep him as the goal, that keeps you kind of humble, stops you going off as a tyrant, hopefully. If you keep looking at him and say, okay, how did he do this? Or how would he have done this? How did he cope with it? The sheep running off in all kinds of direction or whatever it is.
Obviously, this show is Biblios, and we're very much interested in thinking about biblical thinking. And as a pastor, undoubtedly the Bible is shaped your life and what you do. And so I'm wondering, how does the Bible influence your pastoring?
It basically forms the background of everything you do. Just for personal development and growth, the Bible is there all the time. So I read it devotionally. For preaching, like we've been talking about, it's the Bible that you're using as your main text, and how you're trying to bring that across to other people, how they can understand what God's plan for them is. So it's central. Without the Bible, you're not really a pastor.
So you're saying that the way the Bible functions, it's almost like your manual for being a pastor and the kind of role you play.
Yeah, for everything that you do. And it informs your decision making and your planning and everything else that you do. And you're using it to try and teach other people principles of how to live their lives. So the Bible is really central to all of that.
Thank you for watching. Let us know what you think about the pastor's role in your life by leaving us a comment below, and check out last week's episode by clicking on the screen. See you next time.